Well, that struggle.
You did on
You mentioned something about struggle. I wanted you to repeat the idea of the struggle between ethics or something. You said.
Well, I mean, another way to think of this is like, in economics we talk about the value of something, and often say that the price of it is the value. How much is that worth? And so part of the idea here, I think, is that talking about value in economics in terms of money is actually the same as talking about values in terms of ethics. Is that we're talking about two different systems of value. In one system of values, like Michael was saying, we're reducing everything to, our value is to reduce everything to this money value. It's not that that's a different definition of the word value. It's a different value system. It's a different set of ethics. And so in a way, everything in the economy is a struggle over values and what it is that we value, what we choose to value, and how we choose to act those values out. So in that way, the struggle is that at every moment, we're all confronted with this. How do we live in this world? How do we live in the context of all the relationships that we're involved in? Once we realize that so much of what we use involves forms of oppression and exploitation connected with people all around the world, then we have to confront the question of values. And it's a struggle. It means that instead of the economy just being the way that we meet our livelihoods, it means the economy is a struggle over values. How do we live together? Does that make sense?
That economic reduction is so pervasive in the economy.
We can't hear anything back here.
I'm just saying how that economic reductionism that he was talking about is a very major defining element of our culture. It seems to be like the thing that just sort of colors everything else that we do.
It'd be great if folks could stand up maybe and
Okay. I work in a food co-op, and we put out a survey a couple of years ago to customers, and one of the questions was, why they shop at different places, and we use the word values, and so many times people assume the word values meant about money. So it's also a struggle for language and to reclaim the language that is actually based in something real and not the one that's been turned into something else.
I really like both the visuals, the one of the help, I'm trapped in the snow globe, and then the egg. I think one of the nice things about the egg is that it improves on the model of production cycle that you see in most economic textbooks, where it's on two sides of the egg, it's sort of households and businesses, right? But one of the criticisms that's made of that sort of production cycle, and the way that economists usually picture it, that's offered by Herman Daly and other folks, is that it tends to end up picturing the environment as something that happens inside the economy, right? And so Daly and others have emphasized, no, we really have to reverse things and picture the economy as something that happens inside the environment. And I think you were sort of acknowledging that in some of the opening remarks you made about the creation portion of this. But I'm just wondering if you guys, in terms of the way you visualize this, have thought about other ways to sort of lodge the notion and visualize the notion that the economy happens inside the environment.
I could add something to that. Carl Polanyi wrote a very important book called The Great Transformation. And the main theme of that was that the modern economy emerged out of a context in which it was embedded in social and political and ethical and cultural relations. And so it's not only that we are embedded in an ecological environment, we're also embedded in a political and cultural environment that tends to become invisible because of the dominance of the economy. And to the extent that it becomes autonomous, it threatens to destroy the very cultural and ethical relations that gave rise to it in the first place. That's the main thing.
This is maybe a little bit of a wacky response to what you're saying. But I think it's a good challenge, how to represent that relationship between economy and environment. One of the problems with saying that there's an environment and then inside of it there's an economy is that you end up creating the idea that there is something that's an economy that's separate from an environment. right? So I think one of the things that I like to think about this circle as is trying to almost get rid of that difference. I mean, because everybody, honeybees, flowers, deer, humans, we all have economies. So in a way, ecology is like the big picture view, looking at everything. And economy is like ecology from the inside. Ecology from the perspective of the people doing it. So we have a particularly weird ecology in our culture, right? But in that way, it's not. I like to think that it's not so much like out here's environment and in here's us, but they're almost like different perspectives for looking at the same thing.
Okay, thank you. Following up on that, I brought a couple of books here that are exactly on this whole thing. About the central thing is the ecology. It's called Life Rules by Ellen LeConte. And she has done something to make an analogy that the global economy is to Gaia, the whole biosphere that we live in, as HIV is to a human being. A wonderful book. Got a couple of first come, first served.
I want to say I put on my glasses so I can read all of your name tags better. So I'm gonna keep stacked so that we can make sure to get to everyone.
One way to visualize it, this comes very close, if you do this, to the eternity or the infinity loop. And if you take the eternity and the infinity loop and turn one side of it, you get what's called a Mobius strip, where the inside is the outside and the outside is the inside, and they're continuous with each other. That's the way I see the relationship between economy and ecology. We've got to think of economy as incorporating and relating to absolutely everything in the ecology of our beautiful planet.
The last two people who spoke, I think it's interesting that we're kind of getting toward this idea that we kind of are the weather. We're creating, there's, market forces feed on irrationality. And people's desires have become quite insane collectively. So we kind of have to approach this problem like we're trying to be therapeutic within linguistics. And that whole thing of the Mobius strip, I think, is a perfect picture of what our dilemma happens to be right now.
On that same vein, it seems like that really makes sustainability jump out. How interconnected they both are. The economy is about sustainability, or it's just not going to be here.
Right.
Yes, this idea of like create institutions and we become separate from those. I guess finding ways, whatever model it is, we carry it. It comes back to value. We carry it with us, and when we create an institution, it's okay. That's it. And none of this. It's got to be flexible, right? We carry the values with us. So how to strengthen it within ourselves?
First, I'd like to point out this gentleman over here did have something that he was waving his hand about before, but he hasn't yet called on, so sometime we might need to be. But lastly, just a commentary since we're all making statements to answer the questions. And book referrals. I read this book, Albion Seed, about when the Puritans first got here and everything, and the most interesting part about it so far is actually the Massachusetts Bay Colony had rules for economic interface. And one of those rules was that you could be persecuted for making more than 100% profit on your investment. And people were. And I think it's interesting because I think so much of the time I'm not a Christian, and I'm not going to be likely in my life. But I think I don't want to be seen as a nostalgia here, but I think it's interesting because most of the time we sort of have this view that everything's been screwed up from the beginning. And it was ruined at the beginning. And I think that we can take certain values and point and say, well, ironically, 400 and some years ago, when gringos first got here and started trying to corrupt this place, they even believed it was unseemly for certain things to happen and persecuted themselves on that. And I think it's interesting because, of course, we were talking about Keynes and Smith and some of the elders. Well, they're not as old as the Greeks. At least they were older than those gentlemen in England, and obviously had slightly better values in some way.
If you go back to the Greeks, there was a law in place in Athens, I believe, that if someone had wealth and they were not using it well, they could be taken to court and their wealth could be taken away and given to someone who would use it well.
We decided what well was.
Somebody had a great deal of wealth. He would be compelled either to at first outfit a trireme or sponsor a drama festival. And they got, this way they really got into it. And didn't, very often they didn't do the minimum, but they wanted their drama festival or their trireme to be the best.
Imagine a competition to do good.
The trireme is the warship.
I guess I'm curious about the piece, how we're gonna overthrow capitalism in our spare time at home, because it seems like, okay, so yeah, it's, you know, we see that we're already like doing all that, and so like, what is the step further, you know, than just saying, okay, yeah, it's gonna come from the bottom up, but still, what is the next push over?
That's hopefully what we'll be talking about in all of our discussions in the afternoon. The way that I think about it, I mean, it's not just all these individual isolated practices, and then that's going to really transform everything, but organizing among them and organizing different new kinds of networks and connections that can mutually strengthen all of them. And, you know, at the same time, resisting and struggling against and trying to change the policies and the laws that constrain all of these.
I could maybe add one thing to that. This isn't exactly an answer because it's not what can we do right now to do that, but part of what we'll be trying to do, at least in some of the sessions, is to try and envision how things could be different on the whole, not just in little pockets and isolated corners of capitalism, but how the whole system, I mean, there are problems with trying to imagine an alternative system, but as I think Ethan mentioned earlier, that system thinking is useful just to suggest alternatives. If you can think about how things could be different on the whole, then you can think about how to connect up all the small things that you're doing and maybe make some steps in that direction.
And the other piece too is all of us, because it's true that all these things exist. I mean, a lot of those things on that circle exist. Some of them don't exist in Maine. You know, some of them exist in other places, and there's so much more of them that could exist. So part of it too is us all asking ourselves, like, what are we doing on a daily basis? If we don't have to wait for the revolution, then there's no excuse for not doing it now.
Yeah.
So what are we doing in our lives and with each other, and not just as individual consumers, but what are we doing with each other in an organized way to actually build these things? Because the more of them there are, then the stronger they'll all be. So in a way, those things are like seeds to inspire us to do more of them.
I'm probably just going to make a statement. It strikes me how much the indigenous people of the world have been sort of holding a workable system, a sustainable system in the way that they live on their land and use it. And it's been interesting to me the last couple of years to realize that one of the points of struggle on the globe right now is that military bases are taking over more and more indigenous lands, like everywhere, you know, Korea, Italy, Hawaii, and, you know, you could go on and on. And that the information stream that we tend to live in this culture just like makes that invisible to us, but I've been feeling that presence strongly, I guess. Yeah.